Capital City Sunday.
A Supreme Court ruling has determined that presidents are immune from criminal prosecution for official acts taken during their presidency. A landmark decision granting former President Donald Trump partial immunity in his January 6 election interference case for his efforts to subvert the 2020 presidential election. The ruling was a major victory for the Trump campaign, the judge overseeing Trump's New York hush money trial pushing back sentencing from July 11, days before the Republican National Convention, to September. With me now on the show is John Gross. John is a UW-Madison professor and criminal defense expert. John, thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Happy to be here.
John, what will Department of Justice Special Counsel Jack Smith now have to prove to the court in Trump's January 6th trial?
So he's going to have to do a couple different things. One thing he'll have to do is he'll have to go through the different allegations in the indictment, the different behaviors or acts that former President Trump is alleged to have committed that would further this conspiracy to overturn the election. And he's going to have to convince the court that former President Trump wasn't acting in his official capacity as president, that these were something that would not hamstring a president in the future if they were prosecuted for these types of behaviors. And so he's going to have to demonstrate that this wasn't a core part of the job, that these were other things. And so he'll make arguments such as I would expect at the campaign rally on January the 6th, that this was campaigning, right? This wasn't the president exercising authority or doing a presidential function. This was a candidate doing a function. And he's going to have another challenge because the court actually made a specific ruling about what evidence could be included. And they said any evidence, any communications between a president and their staff, their other executives, right, including the vice president, that's actually privileged. So it can't be part of the evidence to support the allegation that a president was acting outside of their official duties and engaging in some type of criminal behavior.
There are concerns that this ruling will have major implications for future presidents and what is allowed under their core duties. An example being former President Richard Nixon would have been immune for his prosecution in his Watergate investigation. What are the greater implications here?
I mean, this was really a stunning decision. I mean, I don't think anyone expected, legal experts expected, that the court would go this far to protect a president. And there was some hint during oral argument, and certainly from Justice Roberts' opinion, that there's a concern about retaliation, that one administration would come in and just prosecute the former. But the court goes a long way to insulating the president's behavior, and I think one of the most problematic aspects of the decision is they basically said the president's intent when doing an official act doesn't matter. That is completely adverse to our concepts of criminal law. Intent is what makes something criminal, that you intentionally cause harm, that you intentionally do an act. And they're basically saying you can't look at the president's intent. And that's staggering because the president has, for instance, the power to appoint Supreme Court justices. And ironically, a future President Trump or any future president, when making that selection, could say explicitly to their vice president or their cabinet, I'm only going to appoint someone if someone pays me. And not only would that be permissible under this decision, but evidence of a president's admission that they were explicitly doing it, that they were basically taking a bribe, would be excluded. And so I honestly think, in the future, I think presidents, people running for the office, will have to confront this decision. And I think they should be asked, do you agree? Is this how a president should exercise their discretion? Because the court has given basically the power to sell offices to a future president. And so I think whatever fear the court had about retaliation or retribution from one side to the other, I think they've overcorrected for that fear and really extended wide immunity to President Biden in the moment, potentially President Trump in the future, and any president who's elected.
Justice Sonia Sotomayor said in a dissenting opinion on the court's ruling that under this decision, extreme scenarios such as the president ordering an assassination would be granted immunity. Is that a possibility here, and what other scenarios could potentially be protected by this ruling?
Well, I mean, the people executing presidential directives or orders are not immune. So the hope is, best case scenario from this decision is that even if a president wants to do things that are illegal, but they would be immune from prosecution, that the people surrounding them would not be. And therefore they will refuse to follow those directives. And in fact, one could actually point to an example of this that was part of this conspiracy where President Trump had directed his then Attorney General, Barr, to use the Justice Department to basically search for voter fraud. And Attorney General Barr said there was no voter fraud, and he refused to do it. So I think there are potentials where there are instances where, obviously, if a president appointed the right people who were willing to follow his directives, then you could see some very bad consequences from this. And as I said, the president has the power to appoint judges, ambassadors. I mean, there's an enormous amount of leverage the president has where they could basically extort money, privileges from people by saying, well, I'm only going to exercise my discretion in this way if you pay me, if you give someone a job who I want to get a job. And these are all things that, if he wasn't immune, these would be bribery, extortion, right? These would be crimes. And so a president who wants to abuse their power in office, I mean, unfortunately, the Supreme Court has basically said, go ahead, you're immune.
John Gross, UW-Madison professor and criminal defense expert, thank you so much for joining us on the show this morning.
Happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.